All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most baffling collapses in all of history, the fall of the mighty Babylonian Empire. I mean, this is a story packed with chaos, a huge mystery, and a final act that, on the surface, makes absolutely no sense. So let's get right into it. Okay, so just picture this for a second. The unstoppable army of Cyrus the Great is literally at your city gates. Your entire empire's fate is hanging by a thread. So what do? Well, if you're Belshazzar, the ruler of Babylon, you throw a massive party.
Yeah, it sounds completely insane, right? But as you're about to see, the truth is way more complex than that.
Yeah, this was no ordinary party. Think of it more like a high-stakes, last-ditch religious gamble. Belshazzar gets 1,000 of his top nobles together, and in this, really just a move of pure desperation, he brings out all these sacred treasures they'd plundered from other temples, including Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. And what was the goal here? To praise all the gods of Babylon, to call on every single deity they could think of for some kind of miracle. And right here, this is the central puzzle we're going to solve in this explainer. You see, the book of Daniel calls Belshazzar the son of the legendary king Nebuchadnezzar. But historical records are pretty clear. The king at the time was this guy named Nabonidus, a usurper who had zero blood relation to that great dynasty. So who was actually in charge? And how in the world do we make sense of these two totally different accounts? To figure this out, we actually have to rewind the clock a bit. Back to the death of Nebuchadnezzar himself. I mean, this was the guy who built Babylon's glory. But the second he was gone, he left this massive power vacuum, and it kicked off a period of just intense instability. And when I say chaos, I mean chaos. Just look at the difference here. Nebuchadnezzar ruled for a solid, stable 43 years. His son, Evil-Merodach, he lasted just 2 years before being assassinated in a palace coup. Then his successor, Neriglissar, he managed 4 years. And his son, Labashi-marduk, who was just a kid, was assassinated after maybe 2 months. Some sources say 9, but either way, it's shockingly short. This isn't just a transition of power. This is an empire in an absolute freefall. So, into this complete mess step the two figures who are going to define Babylon's final years. A new king who just grabs the throne, Nabonidus, and his son, the man we know as Belshazzar. Now, Nabonidus he was not a popular guy. For starters, he had no legitimate claim to the throne at all. He was a usurper. Second, he made a huge religious mistake. He basically elevated his personal favorite moon god, Sin, over Babylon's main god, Marduk. You can imagine how well that went over with the powerful priests. They were furious. And then, in one of the weirdest moves you'll ever hear, he packed up his entire court and moved it 500 miles away to a place called Tema in Arabia. He was gone, absent from his own capital for about 10 years. So this created a really strange power-sharing situation. You've got Nabonidus, who's the official king, but he's basically living in semi-retirement out in the desert. But someone's got to actually run the capital, right? And that job fell to his son, Belshazzar. He was the one on the ground in Babylon, the de facto ruler, the guy who would have to face down Cyrus's invasion. Okay, so now we know who Belshazzar was politically. He was the guy in charge. But that still doesn't solve our original mystery. Why was he called Nebuchadnezzar's son? Well, the answer isn't in politics. It's in family, and in the way words were used back then. You know, the key to unlocking this whole thing is really understanding the language. In these ancient texts, the word father could totally mean your direct biological parent, sure, but it was also used all the time to mean a royal ancestor or the founder of a dynasty. You could almost think of Nebuchadnezzar as the founding father of the glorious Babylonian Empire, but it turns out there's an even more direct connection than that. Remember that crazy feast we started with? Well, during all the chaos, a figure who's only called the Queen shows up and speaks to Belshazzar with a ton of authority. And historians widely believe this was Belshazzar's mother and the wife of King Nabonidus. And here's the crucial part. It's believed she was a daughter of the great Nebuchadnezzar. And right here, this is the piece of evidence that just ties it all together. It's from the book of Jeremiah, and it's a prophecy that says the dynasty would last through Nebuchadnezzar, his son, and his grandson, and that the empire would fall during that grandson's time. Now think about it. Those short-lived kings we saw earlier, they don't fit the bill. This points directly to one specific person. And there it is, all laid out. It's actually pretty simple when you see it. Nabonidus, the usurper, marries into the royal family to make his rule seem legitimate. He marries a daughter of Nebuchadnezzar. They have a son, Belshazzar. And that makes Belshazzar the direct, biological grandson of the great king Nebuchadnezzar. So you see, the historical and biblical accounts aren't fighting each other at all. They're telling the exact same story from two different angles. The mystery is solved. So now that we understand who Belshazzar truly was, let's go back to those final, fateful moments of the Babylonian Empire. So the man holding that frantic religious feast, pleading with the gods while the enemy was literally pouring into his city, he wasn't just some random ruler. He was the end of the line. He was Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, the very person the prophecy of Jeremiah said would be on the throne when Babylon's time finally ran out. And the year it all came crashing down, 539 BC. After decades of being the world's superpower, it was over. The end, when it came, was swift. Cyrus's army crushed Nabonidus's forces out in the field, and the king just fled. That left Belshazzar, the grandson, all alone to command the defense of the capital. On October 12th, the city fell. And just to add another fascinating layer to all this, that date, the 16th of Tishri on the Babylonian calendar, corresponds to the second day of the biblical Feast of Tabernacles. So, we're left with this final thought. Was the fall of Babylon just historical inevitability? You know, the result of weak leadership, political chaos, and a much stronger invading army? Or was it something more? A story where history and prophecy seem to converge on one single fateful night, with a desperate grandson right at the center of it all. What you take away from that, well, that's up to you.